Further supplements of the spiritual revolution. 11:12, Morality of absolutism. Presentation of deepest identity. Unknown, dark, yet somewhat recognizable. Before cauldrons of turmoil, burning, aching division. An absolute testimonial statement. What content does it propose? Any particular aim, message, decree? Subject of willpower. Absolute encapsulation. Striving to represent something, anything at all positive, to an empire long since in decline, bent on sterilization, superior submission, dismissive and negative a patriarchal sublimation, to demonstrate a certain positive idea without flaw beyond criticism, a projection of necessity, fate, predetermination, the principle of higher power in remembrance of a distant legacy. In consequence, a necessarily solitary individualism, the cauldron dejects him. Once flowing purple robes, a beggar of daily bread. Yet as instinct is possessed, revelation of spirit, a magnanimous characterization, showmanship, monstrosity, and negation of shame. As pride advances, time reevaluates scheme. The return to spiritual communion, broken might surveyed, in an effort of true love. If ever God remembers, inevitably destruction of soul and anatomical annihilation. Reunification of symbolical elements. Born again master. November 12, 2011. 11/16/2011. Letters of interest too. Some miscellaneous writings archived here, most if not all of them being derived from some correspondence with a good friend. November 16, 2011 notes with two good friends that I have made during the past few months on the internet. November 7, 2011. Right now, most of the snow around here is melted. The forecast for the next few days says that the weather will be rather sunny and warmer. The snow was comforting while it lasted, though of course I'm certain there will be snow here later this season. When I hear about this, that it is about to snow, I usually head out to the grocery store and stock up on supplies. I do this merely to avoid needing to drive additionally in the snow, which is dangerous both for myself and for my car, but otherwise it's a very enjoyable to experience. I tend customarily to be severely critical of my art, writing, music and such produced. But sometimes I feel certain that these particular criticisms I give to myself may appear far too unrealistic or unnecessary and unnecessary. Though I simply strive for perfection, sometimes this temptation goes rather overboard. However, not many people these days truly write in the greater sense. It's hard to find close intellectual partners in correspondences due to this poverty-stricken condition. It leaves most rationalists wary, isolated, and lonesome. As I, for some time at least, have experienced the reality of this. I have some friends on the internet now that I'm very thankful for, in that they correspond much with me and create a sense of intellectual companionship and mutual alliance. This overall generates much happiness for me and for these others. I love the fields, forests, and climates of nature so very much. As maybe you know, I'm currently situated in a high elevation terrain, with forests, cold weather, and snow. The specific climate that I have found over the years I tend to categorize as ideal. Everything about it recommends such age, maturity, and wisdom, height and extraction from lower classes, cold, objective, just purity of expression, clear-headed thoughts, and intellectual sharpness. I've been feeling for a long time that a population annihilation, or at least a great decrease in the state of the West, would do much positively, not to the economy or internal subjective details of the civilization, but to the state itself. As for personal experience especially, it is rightly understood that people are generally established in so much a happier, more joyous manner when the effects of overcrowding and overpopulation recede, that there is a noble generation that forms when the human being becomes much rarer in representation. I think in whatever way it occurs that a reformation of the human population is ever so desirous right now, especially as the Occident is inevitably proceeding toward an age of intellectual darkness and unfortunate spiritual destruction. November 7, 2011. In regard to the understanding and comprehending of the esoteric, it is something rather tremendous, unique, and abstract, that to acquire the right knowledge for it is quite a laborious task to achieve. It had taken me many months of reading Crowley to finally get a better picture and assimilate the many intricate details of all such things of his doctrines rightly. the Kabbalistic science symbolism behind the tarot cards, the abstract relation and cross-reference between the zodiac, the 22 Hebrew letters, the classical elements, the metaphysical symbolism of the nuclear family, father, mother, son, and daughter, the four-part name of the Tetragrammaton. Crowley himself, I do believe, may have performed animal sacrifice here and there, much to his chagrin, as I don't think he would find it fit to do so after such intellectual acquisition, foremost insight, and religious research performed of his own over the years. I personally believe that there exists for wicked men, or those not rewarded with salvation, an additional life for the person, as the principles of heaviness of sin and weightiness of malice still tie the subject down to the earth. I believe that woman does not experience salvation right after her immediate death, but must journey to the form of the highest manifestation of the will's creation, man, and work out her suffering and tribulation at this position in order to achieve spiritual sublimation. That this is so, for woman is wanting projection, health, and wisdom. She is like Amphotos, wounded from the spirit, in metaphysical, symbolic, abstract suffering, and unable to perish, as secondary, and comes about after man has dominated the earth, or rather as he was androgynous, closer in resemblance to the later man. The Hebrew god is such a prime example of this very masculine androgyny. Birds, land animals, insects, fishes, all of these too must journey their way back to human form through additional and successive lives, that they do not achieve salvation in the present form. I have read elsewhere in Buddhistic thought and such that there are in fact forms of life unseen to the naked eye that exist in abstracted dimensions outside of the universe, that there is a realm similar to the Christian hell, with various forms endowed for the subject, with various degrees of suffering and severity. The form itself is demonic, and it experiences all sorts of trouble, mischief, repetitive annihilation of the soul, regeneration into the same cycle of agony and nightmare, that the sufferer must endure these degrees of hell for a frightening amount of time, millions or billions of years, before the subject is to achieve a rankification, step up out from the madness. It is frightening to think about this, that as the earth, the universe and such is all in possession of the very same will that represents the nature of God, that it is understood that all ourselves as human beings have undoubtedly undergone this hell, or will go through it with it sooner or later, as we as human subjects invariably perform deeds and actions wicked enough to merit our plummeted necessity into that very inferno. I've read as well within the channels of Buddhism that there are ghosts in the earthen realm, subjects that perish and come about as such for peculiar reasons. I found also that there are subjects of deity that reside within the heavens or clouds, their existence and manifestation brought about by human subjects prior deep and prolonged meditation and contemplation of himself and of God. Even these deity-like spirits fluctuate, as nothing is eternal. It may eventually find themselves summoned and objectified into human form once again, or as demons or parasites and such. I think that in regard to everyone having once been a Cleopatra or an Alexander the Great, that such a thing may be, however, possible only for a few persons, or as a subject's life does not experience existence in every single form, creature, or breathing substance. As if it were so, the road and path to salvation would take far too long, and the effects of spiritual weariness on a subject would generate eventually a sense of an utmost profound exhaustion. Such a thing is not found in the realm and dimension of material reality. Anyway, Crowley was a rather very skilled and ingenious mountaineer. His talent at the game of chess was unparalleled. However, he was an experimental in intoxicants, which, when I find this in a person, I'm naturally immediately disillusioned of their potential value as a magnanimous man. He was also likely flirtatious with the depravity of homosexuality, especially in his early years. So I have read, but for some certain reason, as I have read from one of his close contacts that described the daily life in association with Crowley, that he was instead, while exposed, a man of extreme and radical conservation, had very great values similar to the many great men of the past, that there was some degree of understandable redemption to his character. November 8, 2011. I tend to have a fascination with the culinary arts. I'm a die-hard fan of the dated television show Iron Chef. I think I've learned ever so much from the practices of the chefs of the show. I've been meaning to cook much myself, however, I'm rather financially limited at this position in my life. I find empathy in the notion of creating separate states, especially of the idea of creating states that are either fundamentally and unchangeably liberal, or fundamentally and unchangeably conservative, so that those who aspire consummately to either of those ideals may situate themselves inside one of these states to their preference and liking, so that a general political happiness and harmony may be found in the individuals that desire to live in either one of those kinds of states, that partisan bickering and division would generally not occur. And overall feeling of community may be found. Those aligning themselves outside of their ideals while being situated within that state become alien, hostile, so that alteration and reformative maintenance takes effect and terminates the culture or civilization with a pure and wholesome naturalness and entity. The only difficulty is where to form these states and what to do once formed with the persons in the land that do not align themselves to that state's particular doctrine or principles. Mass migration may occur as such. The melting pot that is America is indeed with every falling day becoming more and more revealed and understood as a great failed experiment. It is no wonder that with the false values and illegitimate ideals of revolutionary America in the 1700s, that a major and significant decline in the state of America, its culture, arts, religious aspirations, science, architecture, sociable dialectic and such, would take only 300 or so years to occur in Revelation, whereas prior examples of true civilizations with a great and strong morality, such as ancient Egypt, had lasted thousands of years without general decay within or throughout its domain and kingdom, as understood and assimilated with its great and masterful morality. A far cry America suggests in relation to truly powerful, stabilized, and secure civilizations. November 8, 2011. I am in knowledge of someone that seems to be able to speak about Hitler objectively and dispassionately, even though the person seems to ultimately disapprove of him, which objective speech in regard to him is a meritorious trait that so few people are capable of doing these days, especially so late in the days of the West, where everywhere in the state there is decadence and indifference toward higher goals and aims, artistic vision, literary ambitions, musical desire, and such. I was able to review some of Hitler's paintings in various books and websites when I was younger. When I was more interested in him, I read in Mein Kampf that he was indeed quite an aspiring artist with an architectural passion, that he applied to art schools, academies, was thereby rejected, apparently because his human figures were drawn really out of proportion and were too small in regard to the buildings or natural phenomena that he would create. Because of this, he experienced much poverty, financial suffering, and much stressful difficulty prior to his political successes that, along with the sad state of affairs the Republic of Weimar had fallen to, I am sure these things understandably generated rather hostile feelings within him. Of course, and he directed his path toward a very deep degree of pessimism and hateful alliance. I never really saw how Marxism and communism were so deeply related or indebted to the use, or how these ideas aspire to eliminate or eradicate various positions of culture, like in Germany, if the Red Menace were ever to have spread successfully to it. But, of course, I'm sure Hitler had his reasons for hating this ideology, as do I. However, I have a rather much different perspective, that with me I understand communism as the rewarding and satisfaction of the herd, the lowbrow, uncultivated peasant and such. something undesirable to naturally gifted geniuses, artists or statesmen, like shamelessly me and the various few others whom I tend to associate with. Communism seems to me worse than democracy, for the government is ruled by the zeros, as is democracy. However, with communism it is ruled by certain heartless, unforgiving, and closed-minded authoritarians, making it nearly impossible to breathe under its curtain for genuine individuals, or to exercise temptations while under its rule to overthrow it, which doing so is a far easier task to perform under democracy. I made mention to a friend of mine that I would like to see various states or empires established with various certain fundamental and fixed ideologies, where some states are eternally conservative, while some others are determinedly liberal, where such subjects of conservative aspiration situate themselves in these conservative states, as subjects of liberal aspiration situate themselves in these other liberal states, so that a sense of comradeship, communion, and harmony generates in the governments and people, where partisan bickering and democratic fighting or struggling between the walls of a country do not much longer take place. There is a happy rule of these subjects, where they are living with themselves, by themselves, in their very own special place in human condition. I think, however, that certain problems would arise initially in order to establish such states, that once the states are established, the question of how to remove the undesirable political elements would manifest. But I think such a situation should handle itself humanely and without resorting to terrible abominations such as genocide or mass murder. The government should simply take its time to migrate in the masses of undesired folk to the various other states that approve of their ideology. This, in general, is all unfortunately far-fetched and unlikely to occur, but it has been a fantasy of mine, as one way to solve the various problems of fighting political contests and competition between these two sides of the spectrum. If liberals want to legalize drugs, then they shall do so in their own states. We will keep them illegal and forgotten in their vital shadows here in this state. Anyway, I have read and heard from various people of rather aspiring intellect the reality of wakefulness in persons during the evening or the night, the intimate connection that most men feel in regard to the sentiments and thoughts, for sleep is approaching them. It is something relatively similar and symbolic in regard to the idea of death, of rest and peace, so that love is inevitably more easily acquired in this state. I personally can confirm this from time and experience. The intimacy and compassion that I feel most generally during this time of evening and dusk, the overall sleepiness and desire to return to bed occurs more often during the morning and afternoon. I don't know if everyone can achieve in poetry a lasting worth or profound vision, as every art requires a gift in the nature of man in order to create something of objective truth, something most are incapable of doing. They are raw and primitive in their grace. Movements are stiff and uninspired, that they must refer to their desires, thoughts, and ideals to concepts, mimicking in a way that the production of truly independent and freely willed poets and artists. Intellect is a quality that is honored and revered. If it weren't for the rareness of such a gift, that all were equal and endowed with the same traits of capability and aptitude, then the effect of the representation and manifestation of true art will lose its vital significance and hardly become something worth admiring or apprehending at all. Therefore, a true artist remains rare. This idea is felt when, finally experiencing such magnanimity, much honor and respect is given to those blessed enough to excel tremendously in their genuine creation. These thoughts are what I value and hold in regard to, however. Everyone creates their own subjective values in relation to themselves and their world. They are lonely, therefore desire others in the external realms to succumb, or rather redirect or reorient their friends or foes to these very various positions in order to feel safe and secure from the nightmare and darkness that this world otherwise truly represents. War becomes frequent as a cause of this reality, but this must remain affirmed if ever man's value system, as with other people's value systems, is therefore to color the world, not surrender it to cold logic and dismissive rationality, which the vast majority of men in this day characteristically do, as a frequent prototype and progenitor to this necessity of war. I personally tend to relate my values and aims through feeling compassion, picturesque images, and the perceptions of ideal artistic beauty, not through means of practical utilitarianism, where objects represent not this artistic beauty mentioned, but rather where these objects represent usefulness for the regulation and maintenance of common mundane life, such a thing which bores me to tears and leaves me feeling weary and alienated, as I desire instead to perfect things, polish them to a fine and finished extent, to sit back and gaze upon their beauty with my reflection in abstract phenomenology. I have lately been inspired very much by the eminence of Lord Byron. I think it is time enough that I read up and study upon his character more fluently, to read some of his works, as I understand him to have been regarded by notable, legitimate philosophers as a man of astounding genius. Goethe as well, I have read many remarkable things, that he was truly a great man, conceived once every 1,000 years. It is strange how this kind of regeneration works, I think. I don't paint any more, for I recognize the paucity of talents manifest within me, that is, I won't paint or draw with any serious motivation, but I'm always capable and free-willed enough to draw it if ever I desire to. But such a thing would be a mistake, and something not a part of my destiny, which is destiny of mine, something I would rather focus and concentrate on working with. I've always, or at least for much of my lifetime, found it difficult to find people that I can relate to, enough to engage in fulfilling intellectual conversations with and learning something that I can find positive and likable and form in my own regard. Fortunately, I have found a friend to correspond with and mutually evolve a form and substance of intellect back in the year of 2006. Our friendship waned over time. For much of this time after this, I was helpless of contact and isolated in a very deep solitude. As an effective consequence, my whole philosophy and doctrinal principles shifted and transformed in retaliation in accordance to this very desperate and solitary condition that is my values of the world turned very internal, personal, and everything I felt and represented was very spiritual and mystical, as so much potential magic was becoming withheld and not ejaculated forth into external activity. I and Admirators are very similar to each other. In many ways, our characters are complementary, as I was the firstborn of his, conceived during Admirators' days of spiritual prime. Therefore, I think that I represent the climax and summit of my Kopecky siblings' characters. There's strangely three others, and with me, altogether a full representation of the Tetragrammaton. Even the nature and characters of my Kopecky siblings and I represent the very ideas of the classical elements. I as fire, my Kopecky brother prime as water, my Kopecky brother final as air, my Kopecky sister as earth. Although I try to keep this to myself in order to avoid generating feelings of resentment or jealousy from them. Anyway, there's much that I did experience in my childhood. I had rather unusual childhood. Because of this, so many experiences evolved and developed my character in a unique way. The rare gift I had at playing the piano in my youth contributed to the strange development of an inevitable eccentricity. I became a showmanship monster because of the events and experiences of my youth. I felt that I stood out from the rest. And rightly so, in actuality, I did, and thus the creation and evolution of my intellect, art, perspective, ideology, and such later took shape in eventual formation. The book agents so far have only scarcely responded to the query letters I have sent to them, unfortunately. I've sent over 80 letters so far to various book agents. Looking back, I seem to be losing motivation, as most of them hardly ever would represent the content and subject matter of my book. I'm thinking I will need to try different venues and sources of information on the web, different websites and such that contain contacts to book agents in order to find certain agents more closely aligned to my book's interests, subject matter such as philosophy, religion, mysticism, autobiography, and such. So the process is taking its time, unfortunately, but I'm not giving up. I will not give up on this. I'm determined to see that my book makes it into the public domain as a driving force and contender of true philosophy, a book among the shelves of other great writers. I don't tend to solidify myself into one particular religion. I haven't done this for years, ever since my final separation from Christianity, during my age of 16. I was indoctrinated from birth into the influence of this religion, and therefore naturally had great difficulties growing out of it, though I was strong about it, and now I am free from it. Pretty much any of the heathen religions inspire me. Buddhism I find so much truth in. Greek and Roman polytheism I find as sources of happy inspiration and free spiritedness in nature and likable existence. The ancient Egyptian pyramid texts had led me to much inspired magic ritual writing that I created a while back. Judaism and the extent of the Kabbalah, as well as the likely notion that the matter and will of the universe represents one God, tends to find confirmation in my ideals. I tend to agree with so much with the idea that the state of civilization, culture, in the world depends on a right and healthy conception, upbringing, and maturation of the generation's youth, as we must teach them the methods in regard to the maintenance of the state and such. Otherwise, the state will eventually likely descend into destructive anarchy and chaos. Order through wisdom, I say to this. November 8, 2011. I was a vegetarian for a period of my life, in fact, though I wasn't a vegan. I think I decided once to take this path simply for the grotesque aesthetics that I found in consuming meat during this time. I was listening to a lot of death metal back then, which I think influenced my direction profoundly, though in a unique way. November 9, 2011. I've been meaning to begin cooking better meals. For now, it has mostly been pasta and rice. I've been very stingy with my budget, and have been as such for quite some time, though by this December I will then begin receiving a better amount of income, that of which I will utilize sparingly to create better dinners and such. Today is rather cool out. There are no clouds in the sky or mist in the trees, which I love the atmosphere that it creates when there are. I see ever so clearly the progression that humanists and egalitarians are pursuing in order to form Europa into a state very similar to America in its customs. The Enlightenment ideals of the 18th century, brought about by a rising hatred of the upper class, aristocrats, and opulent monarchs, Though these ideals were watered down and stupefied in their doctrine for the common man, adapted much for 21st century late idiocy, it is an absolutely dangerous policy to adopt, and once it has done so, only shortly to follow will the force and substance of the Western civilized state decline into a third world dark age, as can clearly be seen already in certain parts of metropolitan America, as well as certain areas in Europa. We do need a leader with an iron fist, now most especially. Somehow there must be a way to achieve this, though I do not place much hope in it ever actually happening this late in the very decadent course of the West. November 9, 2011. I personally hold back on peanut sauce as I'm unfortunately allergic to peanut ingredients. A major setback in trying to become a gourmet, as various foods must be skipped if I'm not to throw it up. Yes, there are these chefs in restaurants that urinate and spit in people's foods. It is disgusting and outrageous. They should be denied the privilege of working for others in their profession. If not, then giving a prison sentence. I haven't heard of Gurkha food until just lately. I love Indian food. In fact, there were these 2 or so Indian food restaurants in the area before I moved up here to the mountains. I would get some chicken and lamb dishes with naan bread, the various sauces. It was all very good. November 9, 2011. There are some cities down the mountain here that contain a plethora of various restaurants. I'm sure there's an occasional rare cuisine to be found, one possibly, hopefully being Gurkha food. I haven't heard of corn until lately. It is likely a unique food found instead outside the United States. Anyway, I love both when a woman has makeup on, or has it on, when she appears merely natural and truly beautiful. Not that I despise makeup on a woman. As for the Sumerian translation of my name, slave, aha, hardly a more remote reality can attempt to falsely summarize the nature of my character as I see myself as one the strongest and most independent of formation that wills and represents the nature of my existence. November 10, 2011. With the commercial nature of the West, the necessity to sell oneself to mercantile profession or something similar, especially starting off young or without a beneficial academic degree to slightly improve a subject's opportunity, it truly creates a disappointing, disillusioning feeling over time. There are so very few job opportunities that I personally searched through in the past that would supply a sense of happiness and contention in doing the work. The truly joyful jobs, such as the ones found in the fields of artistry, musicianship, creativity, and writing, where little correspondence is needed from a usually domineering, hateful supervisor. These professions are almost impossible to make a living off of, especially if a subject is not well known or selling his products by multiple numbers. There should be some sense of automatic entitlement and bestowment of reward for the intelligent, aspiring superior subjects, a kind of trial and tribulation for his worth, and such a method that was used to much advantage and satisfaction in the ancient regime for aristocrats and princes. However, now in this putrid democratic age, everyone is thought very falsely to be equal, unless the government punishes the extraordinary man. It rewards the scorn of the earth by cleverly reevaluating and repositioning both their separate statuses into a state and condition of tedious and dull mediocrity, hardly something ever affirmed or proved of in the natural state, or proved or affirmed within a civilized state, influenced by the traits and characteristics of natural existence. Eggs are, as I am undoubtedly aware, so very nutritious, as well as meat of whatever sort and milk. I personally consume all these types of nutrients, though keep in the back of my mind the terrible conditions that these foods likely source from. Anyway, when I think about the nature of the world, or the state and condition that the West is now fallen within, I certainly form into a degree of very bitter, dejected pessimism, as the West does not improve of my kind, while I, on the other hand, hold true to my oath and despise naturally certain traits in men that ought not to be affirmed or preserved. However, the whole of the West now has overtaken, consumed, and reverted to these very traits, leaving me with a very deep and profound hatred and alienation, naturally, of the vast majority and quantity of Western adherents, for they represent my hatred, while I and the others like me now have very few other sources to find comfort and satisfaction within, because our breathing room and fresh supply of inspiration has become overcrowded and dried up with these opposite subjects. However, in ancient times, these sources of satisfaction and comfort were plentiful and abundant. I'm certain in these times that I would have been much different and situated alongside the nature, state, and character of optimism, faith, and happiness, and such passions and sentiments would be well deserved. November 10, 2011. I certainly do not think less of woman or in any way place her near low on the hierarchy of values. I simply understand the placement and position of the four classical elements, that woman naturally and inherently idealizes and represents the feminine elements of water and earth. That water and earth, by nature and meditation, are secondary. They proceed after fire and air respectively, which these latter elements represent the father and the son. Water and earth represent the mother and the daughter. During the contraction and extension of the universe, fire is immediately existent. The archetypal elements, it by no means finds resonance with femininity, especially when meditated upon in an altered and enchanted-like state. This activity, I'm sure, was practiced frequently by the early sages in order to discover the secrets and answers to the universe. The mother element rests alongside the father. This is especially evident in the Kabbalah. Bina on the left-hand path, number 3, alongside Chokmah on the right, the second separat. Although because Godhead represents Kether, the number 1, Chokmah, the father, are more intimately tied to this actuality than is Bina, the mother. November 11, 2011. Vivaldi's Winter I find ever so enjoyable. The spring movement I perceive very clearly, with such innocence, joy, and philosophical playfulness. These things tend to represent my character to a good extent while in person. It rained here last night, but no snow. It will snow sooner or later, however, I'm certain of this. November 12, 2011. I managed to find a PDF file to Alfred Rosenberg's Myth of the 20th Century on a web archive site just a few hours earlier tonight. I imagined the text of it to be rather different, though that is the burden of my assumption. To the book itself I find many various objects of inspiration, although the idea of the work in general is rather shameless and unconcealed, as well as was written for its own time, seemingly a part of a political trend, where the ideas would not find application to various countries or centuries outside of its scope and field of work and magnanimity. I tend to enjoy certain thoughts of men that are more careful and loving to the attention of the reader, that they may be legitimately utilized for persons or conditions of universal timeless nature. Examples include so many of the earlier philosophers and historians of the West: Kant, Hume, Hegel, Hobbes, Schopenhauer, Gibbon, Descartes, etc. November 12, 2011. I haven't slept in yet. It is 740 before noon here. I've stayed up throughout the entire night. I did this intending to alter and shift my sleep schedule more toward the nocturnal side once again, as was a few weeks ago. Only lately has it become undesirably returned to more afternoon wakefulness, which I do not desire greatly at all, due to my untiring wish to see the sunrise in the morning, which is something I love very dearly. With my nocturnal schedule, this is something that I can become achieved more easily. I read tonight pretty much that these whole and complete articles on the supposed scientific origin and the ages and eras of the history of the planet Earth, the idea of a pre-Cambrian era, 4.5 billion years ago, the Earth forming in its feral states from the residue of the solar creation, the Hadean period. Basically, it is the very first distinguishable epoch of planet Earth, one that I find ever so interesting as the element of fire was so intimately conceived in its time. The hellish inferno, the Earth was at its origination, Hades, hence the era's name. The Archaeon, Archaean period, millions of years afterward, the cooling of temperature, the rising of marine fauna over time, the conception of trilobites and cephalopods, the Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous eras with the dinosaurs, the mass extinctions varying throughout the ends and beginnings of these various cycles, the eventual population of tetrapods and archetypal mammals, man supposedly developing within the past 200,000 years. I think the sources that I've read all of this information was rather reliable. I later looked into the subject of astronomy, searching deeply into the solar system, the galaxy, the relative association of superclusters within the realm of the universe. We are so incredibly small and alone in our forms. I thus concluded. My eyes were bloodshot after all such research. I was gazing upon a computer screen in a pitch-black room for hours on end, thoroughly entranced by these newfound subjects of interest for me. My brother Neil has an insatiable interest in astronomy. Now I can understand the astonishment, amazement, and reverence that he holds for such a subject. I have written a prose work last evening prior to disembarking as well. I think I will shelf Rosenberg for now. However, Evola I will look up today. I will relate with what I find in him. His work does seem very promising. November 12, 2011. I've had a Facebook for not very long a time. Only in July of 2010 did I resettle and reestablish my foundations there, as my prior main source of information was on MySpace. However, soon after I moved from MySpace, I unfortunately found it necessary to delete my account. Every article, photograph, comment, writing, and such was of course saved and preserved. After the web handlers destroyed the glory of self-customization of profiles on their websites, my page, as it fell into the mediocre cesspool of everyone else's pages, lost its representative background image. The text and overall feel of the whole site instantly became monotonous and undesirable to apprehend. Unfortunately, YouTube, Xanga, Blogger, and such remain acceptable websites, I think, for me to present my art accordingly. Facebook seems a generally tolerable place to station within for many of my friends that I have known in person over time are situated over there on that website. I wouldn't mind a visit to Greece someday. Lately, I have been reading much historical subject matter in relation to this country, ancient for the most part, of course. However, it is all interlaced with the same nationality. I think I would enjoy a visit to Italy as well. I can imagine tourists from outside that nation of Greece generating trouble for the towns, the people in their villages. It seems otherwise that Greece may have become fortunately bestowed in its time with a stock of people rather well behaved, organized, and well mannered. This phenomenon occurs through various times throughout various places. I'm not sure about wage mediocrity potentially contributing to these benevolent habits of the people, as I know such an actuality could usually create laziness in people and lead to an economic decline. I believe the Greeks from ancient times, for example, with the possibility to apply the good customs to the modern people today, stand in perpendicular relation to the Romans or various other barbarian races, that the Greeks showed a sense of great cultural understanding and intellectual comprehension. I don't know why this seems so, or where the source from its cause, but I tend to hold high hopes for Greek people and try to understand them more clearly with their unique ways. For the most part of my life, I did not know much about Greek literature. I think that a great majority of other people as well, laymen I may call them, are not endowed with the knowledge and wealth that scholars apprehend through the means of Greek literature. There's Homer, for of course, the Iliad and the Odyssey being virtually the prime examples of literature from this civilization. There's Hesiod, who is similar in subject matter to Homer, with his mythological works and such. However, he appears rather a little later in time. There's Pindar as well. From what I have heard, he is highly exceptional in his verses of poetry. For philosophers that exist Plato and Aristotle, Socrates I will make mention of. However, there isn't any written works of his that remain, or that's ever were written down by him. Plato supplies the voice of Socrates for the most part. There are the pre-Socratics, Heraclitus, Parmenides, Democritus, Pythagoras, etc. Herodotus and Thucydides are excellent historians. These persons document various times and cultures in the ancient world, up to their time, of course. The Greeks, the Spartans, the Phoenicians, the Persians, the Egyptians and such, wars and battles that occur, the Peloponnesian War and such. The various Roman era authors, poets and philosophers as well. I tend to enjoy Virgil, Plutarch, Cicero, Tacitus, Seneca, Pliny, Marcus Aurelius, and such. I know the list may seem overwhelming, but it would be better to try one or two to start off with, not to hoard oneself instantaneously with the real abundance that truly exists in the world of classical literature. There are many more writers and such from ancient times that exist, of course. I'm sure that with an intellectual comparison being made between certain primary states outside of Britain and that of Britain as well, that with the former someone would rightfully take interest in and choice over the latter. Nowadays, I mention this specifically as for so much of the corruption and degeneracy that sources from American and early French ideals has returned haphazardly to Britain, Germany, Holland, and such. All of it, the state of the West and such, It is truly a desperate and saddening place. I wouldn't recommend that someone wants to move from the beautiful, placid countryside of a better, earlier in phase national territory from whatever western area to that of Britain, the Netherlands, or America, at least especially. For the most part, a truly sad state of affairs, especially in the dimension of the political media, the political thought voice that rules and dominates the mode and method of human conduct, virtue, and the overall base intelligence of American people. North Korea fascinates me on one hand, in the incredible strangeness and unique mystery of the country. Of course, on the realistic hand, it is one of the truest social-political nightmares imaginable for our people. I truly hate the nation's leader because of this. What terrible experiences the people of the state are forced to live under throughout seemingly the remainder of their lives, torn, separated from their outside families and relatives, starving from the corrupt system the government generates, beaten and abused out of simplicity. I don't understand why someone would lead a nation this way, yet when I think deeper I recognize the innermost truth, the inherent nature of evil men, that this is only to be supposed from their corrupt station of influence. It would be inevitable, however, that some change does take place. Either the country's government becomes torn down, there will be a war of some sort, a nuclear war. I do not hope for this at all. Some kind of restoration, I think. If the war's tide be turned on the good side, a restoration that the government, the people of Korea, should finally and ultimately recognize and take place. I don't know what to think of Shelley's ideas of an earthly utopia. I recognize the inborn, naturally inherited differences of character in human nature, as we are at the peak of the natural world, therefore are the most unique and individual, and likewise must become consecrated to the state. Plato's Republic ideals and visions seem more likable to me. His profession was that of a philosopher, unlike the passionate, vehement poet that represents for the most part Shelley. Therefore, there seems to be some saner, more rational, more realistic motives behind the ideology and overall Weltanschauung of Plato. If ever I were to affirm a state, a government, one that were to be introduced and incorporated into practice as an actual state, I would need to desire a certain sense of hierarchy and rational positioning, a social order and rank of subjects, that the state itself wouldn't be very big either, that an ease of governance would necessarily subsequently follow, that 3 or so classes abound within their respective limits, philosopher kings, soldiers, and citizens, limiting the privileges of the lower and granting the privileges of the higher, that training would be involved early in the subject's youth to organize and structure the nature, strength, and wisdom of his adaptation to the state, amongst so many various other things that I find rather very agreeable in what sporadic amounts that I have so far read, or at least referred to from Plato's Republic. I tend to study this text fully when I for once arrived to it in my book of Plato's Complete Dialogues collection. I naturally have come to feel aristocratic and special, different from the rest of men through my life's experience. I am in essence much older, wiser, more prophetic than the rest of the most people I will ever meet. Therefore, I cannot allow myself to submit by pride or discipline to an unregulated, diverse mob of colorful meaninglessness and individual, selfish, nihilistic pursuits. I'm different in that I'm not indifferent to things. I take care and love in my efforts. In my aims, I strive to complete tasks nobly, wholly, and virtuously, without resorting to a self-affirming creed that tells a particular subject that he may pass the grade if only he earns the right to respect, pity, love, mercy, and sympathy from his authority or master. This very idea encompasses the whole my portion of philosophy that devalues, disapproves of things. Everything within this practice, the subject that does this represents, for the most part, the common or ordinary, sinful, ignoble man. It is by his nature to act and conduct himself this way. He does not understand any greater method. He does not value right and noble conduct. Therefore he develops resentment toward higher, superior men, and eventually, if not regulated or stultified, generates a culture clash of struggle with the upper class, and civil war must necessarily be averted if peace, harmony, and order in the cosmopolitical state are ever to find waxing once more. I totally agree that whatever people are to be found in Marseille, that there will be hushed or open, as in the majority of the cases today in the West, degeneracy and pitiful behavior. a natural inducement to drugs, alcohol, sexual depravity. All these things I deplore with much vehemence. I long for the days when neighborhood happiness and communal spirit were found in cohesion between the various folk of the land's people. I don't know if this is possible to find any more in the West, not until after this decline is over with and finished. The Kali Yuga, where a new spiritual spring culture begins, somewhere in some way. The Kopecki parents divorced when I was about 9 years of age. However, this particular divorce was not mutually understood. It resulted in much bittersome fighting, especially caused from Adam Bridges. He became a very bitter, terrible man over the following years. Unfortunately, with myself at times living with him. However, it is only during these past few years that I seem to sense that he is finally coming to terms with the divorce in his past experiences, finding that rest and peace that he so prolongedly needed and secretly desired. Without a partner in this phase of my life, at times I do feel rather alone, though writing with and corresponding with others is a comforting idea. It did not snow here today, unfortunately. Last night it was raining. I stayed up throughout the entire night reading much on the geology and evolution of planet Earth from pre-Cambrian times down to the Quaternary period and the introduction of man. I also reviewed very much information concerning the formation of the solar system and the overall relation of it within the Milky Way galaxy and of the known universe. Very deep subject matter. Outer space is truly enormous and almost frightening of how alone we really are right now in this phase of history. There may exist extraterrestrial life, though it is not by our nature or industry to know of this as of yet. I love it when the sun rises and there is snow on the ground, especially if the weather still casts snow onto the trees in the heavens. It is a very beautiful sight. I enjoy gazing at the moon as such. I love meditation so much. I tend to be in a constantly meditative state in general. This came about likely by a radical transformation of character, one that fostered seeds to grow and produce very valuable mana and magic, something eternal and everlasting, or at least it may wither without upon my death, if it is to be a natural death, and representative of a longer life so far lived. The particular piece, Longing for Sublimity, is rather old. It represents a much different, more youthful, innocent style of playing than much of what was to come after its recording. This particular piece was recorded sometime around May or June of 2006, November 12, 2011. It is very true of the theory that I like rock as I do, and rather heavy rock too. I'm not so enthusiastic about it all as I was earlier in my youth. I am typically bored of most second wave black metal, though there are certain death metal songs and albums by bands that I hold dear to me and listen to whenever I please. Some of the main bands that I hold dear to this day are Hellhammer, Celtic Frost, Morbid Angel, Death, Deicide, Cannibal Corpse, Sepultura, Autopsy, and such. There are others that I'm forgetting, however. Metallica's Master of Puppets, as well as the Injustice for All albums I have owned in the past and enjoyed listening to. On the internet there exist so many various songs of all the bands I've mentioned. Celtic Frost is not nearly as heavy as the others listed. I think one might like, especially the band's lyrical content, very romantic and timelessly poetic. Cradle of Filth is okay, I think. The lyrics I enjoy very much, but I find it rather hard to get past the vocal execution of Danny Filth. It sounds too piercing for me. Anyway, I like classical music, of course. Wagner in particular is my absolute undying favorite, especially his opera Parsifal, which is full of legitimate philosophical understanding. I love Baroque music so very much, in fact. Handel especially. He was so very understanding of tragic melody for his time. I'm able to get chills when I listen to his music for the Royal Fireworks, especially the overture to it, as well as the Messia oratorio, the finale especially, in his water music. Certain feelings that I don't find quite as much as in Bach, Yet Bach, I think, seems still an overall genuine master. I think Type O Negative are rather gothic in style. I personally love Peter Steele's early band incarnation, Carnivore, hilarious as it is in its masculinity, yet deeply situated in general philosophical Nietzscheanism. November 13, 2011. There are birds singing outside my window right now. My window is open only slightly as the temperature is in the 50s, I believe. So there's a cool breeze of fresh air coming into my room. Sometimes I feel that nature must find her way into my living situation. Therefore, I feel to be at times a child of nature. I believe the cosmos to be a very fascinating subject to me. Perhaps soon the question of parallel and multiple universes may be proven. I don't think it can ever be proven in concrete practice, though theoretically speaking it may already be proven, so long as it can be felt and understood objectively by someone with a balanced sense of knowledge. One that can look into the past and future and visualize various lives and subject matter detached from his own. This would pretty much represent the theory of parallel universes. I viewed a multiple picture diagram of our position and location within the universe while studying that scientific subject matter earlier, where the Earth was pictured, then followed by its relation to the solar system, then its relation to the Milky Way galaxy, then its relation to other galaxies, then its relation to superclusters of galaxies, then finally and ultimately to its relation to the noble universe. That final picture, my whole book later. Peter is to sound as that of Peter Steele. It's been sounded, recited in the Peter Steele voice tenor way. So just accept it. Yea, that we have a mind, and so be it. Final. Final. That. That final picture was truly so very frightening, as trillions and trillions of galaxies were pictured and represented in so small a detail, all among this haunting black void, where no communicable life for us humans are yet to be found. I need to find yeah. I need to find this diagram once more. It was very fascinating yet despairing. November 13, 2011. I'm still awake. I haven't gone to bed yet. It's 2:50 before noon as I write this here. I've been up reading voraciously. I read an article. Oh, no. I read an article on Julius Evola. I must say, what a new favorite author of mine he is truly. So many ideas he advocates that I find agreements with. I see where my friend gets a phrase of Kali Yuga from, as well Ride the Tiger and such. He takes much influence from what I see from Nietzsche as one source of his, where he values hierarchy, rank, and care of noble superiors. His theory on the necessity of solar solar masculinity over over a soft matriarchy rule. His overall knowledge and experience with esotericism and Eastern religions. Oh no! The transcendental idealism and spirituality of souls consecrated to every word to the end of the book of literature. Peter Steele. and all these ideas of his I found fascinating to me. Afterward, I looked up on a bookstore's website to see if his revolt against the modern world was for sale, which it is. I may drive down to look into it at some time. I also tried to update my book interest list on my page with this name in that particular book of his, although the internet was acting faulty. That's I didn't get to do so yet. Anyway, I feel dismayed and frustrated with the voice of the West. Oh no, much of the time. Yeah. What is thought in regard to the total inversion, reevaluation of public morals is so completely true, incredible. This has come about for that pitiful water idealist morality known as Christianity, adopted by the West, unfortunately and so unfairly. It is without a doubt, over time, inevitable to cause a great confusion and destruction of spiritual manhood and virality. Other religions are far less stupefying or life-denying. We as Hyperborean Westerners have certainly experienced better times, greater days, where now every political construction that represents something at all positive is irritably laced with feelings of resentment, reaction, and indifference toward those traditional elderly ways, those wise values and comprehensive, tried and true methods. It takes a great development of character, of knowledge, and of wisdom, through rigorous abusive experience most of the time, in order for subjects to emerge, standing for once apart outside from the herd, to emerge from the cocoon victoriously in his newfound establishment of practices steeped in true virtue, nobility, and ideality, things the common man hates, because the common man simply does not understand him, or feels threatened by his magnanimous condition. Their fear of the idea of truth that exposes the various fallacies in irrational ways of the masked man. I would love to have lived and experienced a life sometime prior to the Industrial Revolution, most particularly prior to the West's Dark Ages, antiquity in Greece, Rome, etc. This Kali Yuga that is spoken of has only begun accelerating quicker toward the core essence and heavy gravity of a black death. A correlation is found between this and the stars, exhaustive contraction into a black hole, pulling all living, bright, willing matter into an epicenter of shadowy nothingness, an empty vacuous void. November 14, 2011. I'm enthusiastic over Evil now that I've researched him and his general composition. In regard to Sarona, when I was researching him earlier as an offshoot of the subject of Evola that I was studying, I found many of these particular theories of ancient astronauts of his and overall subject matter of Nordic Hyperboreans descending through the earth from some particular aliens that were possibly looking for gold, that eventually these folk intermixed with the earthen races and lost connection to salvation over time. This is the best that I remember from his theories right now. I found his ideas truly elaborate and original, yet interesting in their unique subject matters. There's something I would rather align myself with, as all the originative theories of mankind are beyond men's capacity to legitimately prove in their credulousness. Therefore, as these theories in particular generate a marked fascination within me, especially in contrast to the other more utilitarian approaches, I think that I would rather align myself toward, to direct myself toward this kind of unique theoretical derivation of man, Sarno's ideas, and such. November 14, 2011. I do not take much interest at all in the matter that I may perhaps be somewhat more obscure, or rather universal in my philosophy, or principles in regard to my friends or any other persons. I see to this day the ammunition that was Hitler, his subjects, as a final effect and consequence of the liberal venom and malignancy that now dominates every corner of the Western Empire. I'm surprised to know that Serrano did start off as a communist, as I am told. I did not know that such an eminent man, as he seems to me to be so, could transform his character and morality so completely and radically from one side to the next. I have heard much in the past about this book, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. I may give it a read or skim through it sometime. Anyway, I understand within me certain separate and different theories standing in diametrical opposition to the public mass and popular herd, with their practical utilitarian approach to everything political and sociable, that all men are descended from apes in Africa, and at some time it is nonsense to me. I prefer to believe and take conviction much fancier, more elaborate theories that satisfy my own personal experience within my spirit. Anyway, as it is 400 before noon here right now, I'm just finishing. I just finished watching a whole 3.5 hour director's cut movie of Amadeus. I found it rather genuine, highly artistic, and very true to the characteristics and idiosyncrasies at the time. That is, of the setting of the movie in the 1700s. I enjoyed the movie very much, in fact. However, it was 2011. I see how Mozart was pretty much the first pop star. I've heard various things from persons saying the movie's subject matter was not very accurate, though I think the majority of these inaccuracies merely stem from between the relationship of Mozart and Salieri. I have heard they were rather very much closer in person, more tolerable of each other's art. Surprisingly as well from Salieri's side, which all this isn't demonstrated so much according to the movie. But yes, Mozart's personal character delved into the rather juvenile side. However, I have read from Schopenhauer that genuine men typically show a sense of juvenile, innocent nature in them. They are akin to children in certain ways, probably due to their ability to generalize the universe and thus consequently create a smaller world for themselves, whether it be preferable or despairing for them. Sometimes I feel like a happy monster as a result of this process in person, which is a characteristic that is valuable, rarely found in others today. The primary source of this trait coming from ancient times, where life and spirit were ever so much more approving and originative. At the end of Amadeus, I felt such a tragic connection between Mozart and his overshadowing death figure haunting him, the man that would show up periodically dressed in black, requesting the Requiem to becoming finished. I own Mozart's Requiem, by the way. It is a work of art that is truly valid and legitimate as a contender in relation to his time. The great tragic works of Wagner, even, or at least to some of Beethoven. When Mozart dies in the movie, and thus is placed in that black, dreadful coffin, rowed out to the outskirts of the town, thrown into a pit of nameless, faceless corpses, I can only imagine the terror and frightfulness the spirit would face, especially if it were still trapped within the body of the corpse, surrounded by death, decay, and frozen mud. I can see why the East makes much better practice of cremation instead of such a solitary rest of the still intact body. The ashes of the corpse simply do not represent any more human concepts, ideas, or feelings. It seems to be the better state of rest for a soul. November 15, 2011. Amadeus, I think now, after having watched it, was a great film. I love to listen to Mozart's Requiem on occasions. I haven't listened to much of Verdi this far in my life. Neither do I know much about the catalogue of his works, but I know some about his life and the cultural environment that he was stationed within. I love how Mozart's Requiem is so keen on understanding the notion of general suffering, pain, and agony. This sort of thing is always attracting me to artistic works of a similar nature. I thought about mentioning Liszt, his relation to the early celebrity world, Listomania, etc. Liszt, during one important epoch in my life, has centered my attention all around him. As it may be known that I played the piano, the works of Liszt occupied my chief desire, and I was soon able to play with much accuracy and legitimacy. His virtuosic Hungarian rhapsodies, the Transcendental and Paganini etudes, and various other works, Wagnerian opera transcriptions and such. My whole improvising style was undoubtedly Lisztian. Much of the compositions that I wrote at the time, generally when I was at the ages of 17 through 19 years, were full of appoggiatorias, brilliant glissandos and arpeggios, basically full of showmanship. Yet, as we know of that radical transformation of character that came about during my age of 19, which abstractly changed and negatively affected afterward the vast majority and content of my person, Richard Wagner then took on a sharper role and position in my life. My music dramatically leveled down in its flamboyancy, where nearly every note performed gained meaning, rather than mere air or superlative detail. It all seemed rather Christian, but I think the condition that I was fallen into at the time was rather revolving around Christian ethics, as I unfortunately knew or could associate myself in person or in thoughts with virtually any other than those of a Christian spirit. Thus my whole philosophy, as reactionary and oppositional as it internally was to Christian ethics, necessitated an orientation and understanding of a certain Christian doctrine. If my theoretical dissertations and ontological values were not to face the most continuous and frequent rejection and denial of human assimilation, it was a pathetic scenario. To this day, I'm trying to, as much as I can, to prevent various men from wholly and completely succumbing to that aberrational monstrosity that is Christian ideology. Otherwise, the true, strong, wise, and masterful ethics would never find the potential enlightenment or positive consciousness within the spirit of man. Yet, while every one out of 100 or 1,000 or lately 1,000,000 characters are naturally conceived and supposed to represent masterful absolute morality, it is unfair to rape them and disclose of them to their wills. They must be able to breathe freely as themselves in their true spirits. Otherwise, the sharpest madness will eventually rear its head. Terrible actions of mass murder, tyrannical despotisms by fortunately acquired rulers, domestic abuses, and such will all come about as reactionary opposition to the sterile, indifferent, and nihilistic environments the civilized world imposes itself toward. Virtually all men and women are succumbed in their near entirety to the maddening, clever, cunning, and delusional ethos representative of Christian morality. Anyway, as I digress, I think that Don Giovanni is perhaps my favorite work of Mozart's. Unfortunately, I have yet to listen to this in its entirety. I was meaning to rent the whole opera from a public library within my town for some time before I moved to the mountains. Otherwise, I decided to simply purchase it somewhere else. I think that with the chronological progression and development of music, without any significant part or piece taking its true and realistic conception, that Wagner's music indeed wouldn't have graced the ethereal dimension of Western music. So, for this historical necessity, I rejoice in these developments taking place. I agree on the idea of cremation wholeheartedly. I understand that Hyperboreans during antiquity and the Dark Ages weren't necessarily well disposed to the process of cremation. Not entirely, though sentiments and residues of this action did appear in various places throughout the northern lands. I think too that the cleansing process of fire to corpse is akin to a snake shedding its skin. Indeed, it is by this finalistic process that stagnation and internal undesirable permanence undo themselves. With the corpse in the form of ashes, can the spirit truly become freed in order to take on whatever deified or demonized or human, animal, plant form again, if it ever were to live again. That it necessarily desires to come into a state of being. November 15, 2011.